The new CEO fired me 3 months before I was set to retire, after 30 years of loyalty. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're too expensive now." I didn't argue, I didn't plead, I just nodded, quietly stood up, and left his office. But he had no idea what I had planned. My name is Richard. Most people just call me Rick. For 3 decades, I gave everything to that company. I watched it grow from a mid-size operation with 2 floors of leased space downtown into a national player with satellite offices in 5 cities. I wasn't a figurehead. I wasn't coasting in a corner office. I worked, really worked. I handled the most difficult contracts, built systems from scratch, mentored staff, kept client relationships warm when they went cold. I was the guy they called when things got ugly, and more often than not, I fixed what no one else wanted to touch. When the old CEO stepped down after 24 years, there were rumors that I might be next in line. I never asked for it. Never hinted. I didn't play politics. But people noticed how often my name came up in conversations that mattered. The board knew me. The staff trusted me. I didn't need a title to be respected. But respect doesn't mean much when a new broom comes in swinging. He was young. Sharp suit, firm handshake, polished resume. Had a reputation for aggressive realignment and modernization, which usually means cost-cutting and gutting everything that's been working quietly in the background. I knew what he was the moment he walked in. One of those turnaround guys, less interested in people, more interested in spreadsheets. He'd been there 5 months when he called me in. It was just before lunch on a Wednesday. His assistant scheduled the meeting for 30 minutes. I didn't think much of it. I had been helping transition one of our legacy systems to a new platform and thought maybe he wanted a status update. Instead, I sat down, and he slid a single envelope across the desk toward me. He said, "Rick, I've been reviewing compensation across departments and unfortunately, we're having to make some difficult decisions. You've been with the company for a long time, and I respect that, but we need to make space for more adaptable, affordable leadership." I remember the exact words. More adaptable, affordable leadership. Like I was an outdated subscription he could cancel to cut overhead. I didn't open the envelope. I just looked at him, nodded once, and said, "Understood." He paused, probably waiting for a reaction. Shock, pleading, maybe even anger. I gave him none of it. He was fishing for something he wouldn't catch. I thanked him for his time and walked out. That was it. 3 months before I was set to retire. 3 months before the pension kicked in at full value. 30 years reduced to a line item on a balance sheet. What he didn't know, and what the board hadn't bothered to check, was that I had spent the last decade quietly preparing for exactly this kind of moment. Not because I expected betrayal, but because I understood how the game worked. When companies start talking about vision, agility, and future-focused leadership, they usually mean they're about to throw their elders overboard. So I prepared. Every bonus check, every raise, every piece of overtime pay, I'd funneled it into a private portfolio. Real estate, conservative stocks, a few dividend funds. Not extravagant, but steady. I didn't talk about it. I didn't show it. I just kept stacking bricks. More importantly, I built relationships. Not just inside the company, but with clients, vendors, even competitors. I treated people with respect. I followed through. I never oversold, never cut corners, never passed blame, and people remember that, especially in industries where trust is worth more than your quarterly report. When I got back to my desk, I didn't pack up right away. I took the envelope, placed it in my drawer, and spent the next 4 hours documenting everything. I didn't erase anything. I didn't sabotage systems. I just left a clear professional trail. Notes, passwords, client histories, open issues, everything the next person would need. Then I went home. Quietly. No farewell lunch, no dramatic exits. I didn't tell anyone, not even my closest coworkers. The people who mattered would know in time, and I didn't need applause. I needed distance. My wife knew something was wrong before I walked through the door. I sat down, told her everything, and then I told her the rest. How I had already lined up meetings with 2 former clients who'd left the company years ago, not because of me, but because of bureaucracy and poor service. I had kept in touch with them over coffee and casual check-ins. They still trusted me. One of them had once said, "Rick, if you ever go independent, call me." I was planning to wait until retirement to take that step. Now, the decision had been made for me. By Friday, both clients had responded to my message. By the following Tuesday, I had signed contracts for consulting services. Nothing flashy, nothing public. Just solid, high-value work. The CEO thought he was cutting a cost. What he'd actually done was walk me straight into independence and take 2 of the company's longest-tenured clients with me. I didn't poach them. I didn't pitch anything unethical. I just told the truth. I was free. And if they wanted to work with me directly, they knew where to find me. But the fallout didn't stop there. By the end of the second week, a former colleague reached out. She had heard about my departure through the grapevine. She'd worked under me for years, and now she was drowning in overlapping deadlines and poor direction. The new leadership had moved quickly to fill my role, with someone younger, cheaper, and utterly overwhelmed. She asked if I'd consider bringing her in on some of the freelance work. I said yes, but on one condition. We do things our way. No corporate fluff, no padded timelines, just clean, honest work. She agreed. Word started spreading. Not because I bragged, not because I posted online or made noise, but because people remembered who I was when I had power, and they trusted I'd be the same man without it. The real irony, the CEO never followed up, never checked to see how things were running after I left, never reached out to say thank you or ask for clarification. He assumed I'd disappear. Instead, I got busier. My days were full. Not with the endless, bloated meetings I used to sit through, but with real work. The kind that meant something. The kind that reminded me why I had stuck it out for 30 years in the first place. I didn't set out to build a company. That was never the plan. All I wanted was to finish strong. Maybe retire quietly and take my wife on the trip we'd been putting off for 15 years. Italy. Florence, to be specific. She studied art history in college, and every few months she'd pull out that old travel brochure and say, "One day." I used to laugh and say, "Soon." Now, without warning, soon had arrived. But before Florence, I had work to do. After those first 2 consulting contracts landed, I kept things simple. Just me, a laptop, and a kitchen table that doubled as a workspace. No office, no website. I didn't need one. These weren't cold leads. I had earned their trust over years of showing up when others wouldn't. Now, they wanted what they couldn't get from the company anymore. Straight answers, accountability, and someone who understood their operations better than their own internal teams. I didn't price myself low. That's a mistake a lot of people make when they go solo, thinking they have to undercut the market to survive. I didn't. I priced fairly, and I delivered consistently, on time, without fluff. That's when something unexpected happened. One of the clients, a logistics firm I'd supported back in 2011 during a major restructuring, introduced me to a partner at a regional supply chain firm. Apparently, my name still carried weight, and my work hadn't been forgotten. He asked for a call. The meeting was short. He explained their issues. I offered a few thoughts. Nothing groundbreaking, just fundamentals. He paused and said, "You wouldn't believe how long we've been trying to fix that." A week later, I had my third contract. I wasn't chasing work, it was finding me. Meanwhile, back at the old company, cracks were beginning to show. The first sign was subtle, a delay in quarterly deliverables. A vendor I still had contact with mentioned that schedules were slipping. Deadlines weren't being met. People were confused about who was responsible for what. Then the calls started. Quiet ones. After hours. People I'd worked alongside for years asking questions like, "Did you leave willingly?" Or, "Did you see this coming?" I could hear the unease in their voices, like they were waiting for someone to confirm that the floor was, in fact, shifting beneath them. I kept my answers short. I wasn't interested in gossip, but I could tell they were nervous. The leadership vacuum was real, and the CEO, who was supposed to be injecting new energy, had already alienated the very people who made the company function. The new guy didn't know their names. He didn't ask about the systems or the long-standing relationships that held things together. He was too busy rearranging charts and installing efficiency dashboards that no one had asked for. I knew how this would end. By the end of the first month, I had more work than I could handle alone. So I brought in the same colleague who had called me in week 2. She was sharp, thorough, and knew how to work without ego. We didn't talk about titles, we just got things done. Then she said something that made me stop. "You know," she said, "this isn't just consulting anymore. What we're doing, it's a business." I hadn't thought of it that way, but she was right. We had structure, we had systems, we had revenue. More than that, we had momentum. So I filed the paperwork, registered a name, kept it understated, just initials and a tagline that meant something to me, built on trust. We didn't advertise, we didn't need to, word spread. In our industry, people don't hand over their operations to strangers. They talk, they compare, and when someone delivers, people notice. By month 3, just as I was supposed to be hitting retirement, I had 5 active clients, 2 contractors working with me, and a new rhythm to my day. It was busier than I'd expected, but it felt right. One morning, while reviewing a project scope from a new client, I got a text from an old coworker, someone I hadn't heard from in over a year. It just said, "You were right." Then another message followed. Apparently, a key client had walked away from the company. Quietly, no conflict, just didn't renew. They cited loss of continuity and reliability. I knew exactly who they meant. And here's the twist. The new CEO had no idea how deep those relationships ran. He thought everything was transactional, that clients just wanted numbers and quick fixes. He didn't understand that what kept them loyal wasn't just the product, it was the people behind it. That same week, I received a call from a former board member. Not a close friend, but someone I'd worked with during several strategic reviews. He didn't waste time. "I heard you've been busy," he said. I said, "Doing what I've always done. Just without the meetings." He chuckled and said, "We may need to talk." "Things aren't going well here." I kept my tone neutral. "What happened?" He hesitated. "The new guy doesn't listen. He's burning through goodwill like it's an unlimited resource." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth was, the company wasn't failing because of one decision. It was unraveling because the trust that took decades to build had been treated like an inconvenience. That's something a spreadsheet can't measure. The board member floated an idea. Maybe I'd consider consulting for the company again. Not in-house, independent, quiet. Help stabilize a few things. I told him I'd think about it. But inside, I already knew the answer. I wasn't going back. I didn't need to prove anything. I had given 30 years. I left with my head high. I wasn't going to be someone's fix-it man after they'd thrown away everything I helped build. What they needed now wasn't me. It was humility. And that's something I couldn't sell them. That night, I told my wife about the call. She just smiled and said, "I guess that trip to Florence might have to wait another few months." Maybe it would, but now it was on our terms. And still, there was one more thing I hadn't shared, something that had been growing quietly in the background. It started with a letter. Not digital, paper, thick envelope, heavy stock, postmarked from a state I hadn't visited in years. The handwriting was familiar, but I couldn't place it at first. Inside, a brief note, no return address, just a message. I heard what happened. We've been waiting for the right moment. If you're open to a conversation, give me a call. Same number. No signature, just an area code and 7 digits I hadn't dialed since the early 2000s. It took me a minute to realize who it was, a former client. Not just any client, someone I'd worked with when I was still figuring things out. Back when I thought being successful meant having a full calendar and a clean inbox. He ran a mid-sized manufacturing operation back then, tucked away in the Midwest. The kind of business that didn't make headlines but kept entire communities working. I'd helped him modernize their supply chain during a time when everyone else was focused on cutting corners. He was old school, firm handshake, long memory. So I called. He picked up after 2 rings and got straight to it. "I've been following the shakeup at your old firm. Figured it was just a matter of time." I laughed softly. "You and me both." He said he had something in motion. Nothing flashy, just steady growth. They'd recently absorbed a struggling competitor and were trying to stabilize operations. And he needed someone who could get their internal processes aligned before the cracks widened. "I don't want consultants," he said. "I want someone who gets it." That was his phrase back then, too. Someone who gets it. No buzzwords, no pitch decks, just straight talk. So I flew out the next week. It was like stepping back in time. Same office, same wood-paneled conference room. Even the receptionist hadn't changed. The place smelled like ambition and machine oil. He laid it all out. Systems were outdated, communication was scattered, and middle management was caught in the crossfire. He didn't want a temporary fix. He wanted a foundation. By the time I left that afternoon, I had a retainer agreement in my bag and a handshake deal to build a long-term operations strategy. When I got back home, I sat at the kitchen table with a coffee and just stared at the numbers. If someone had told me 3 months earlier that I'd be fielding offers like this after being shown the door, I would have laughed. But it wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about proving the CEO wrong or showing the board they'd made a mistake. That ship had sailed. This was about doing the kind of work I cared about. Without the red tape, without the ego games, without the hollow meetings. Meanwhile, word about the company kept trickling in. One of the senior engineers reached out. Someone I mentored years ago. He'd walked into his performance review and was told his value needed to be realigned with future objectives, whatever that meant. 2 weeks later, he resigned. Another left soon after, then another. Within 6 weeks, 4 of the core team members had left, and each time someone new messaged me, either for advice or to ask, discreetly, if I was hiring. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just fallout, this was a quiet exodus, and the CEO. He was still smiling through conference calls, repeating the same phrases about transformation and market agility, while the foundation beneath him was eroding in silence. I kept working. I brought on another contractor, someone I'd known from way back. We built a lean operations model for the manufacturing group, designed not just to patch holes but to scale. Simple frameworks, clear reporting, built-in transparency. Clients liked it. They appreciated that we didn't oversell or overpromise. We listened, then delivered. By month 6, I had turned down more projects than I accepted. I wasn't chasing volume. I was focused on doing the kind of work I could stand behind. That's when the email came. From a client still with my former employer, one of the last few holdouts who hadn't walked. He said their account manager had changed 4 times in 5 months. No consistency, delays, budget confusion. Worse, he said they'd been promised a service upgrade that never happened, and when they asked questions, they got silence. "I remember how it used to be when you were there," he wrote. "It was simple. We asked, you answered." Then the last line. "We're open to other options. Let us know if you're available." That was the moment I realized something important. The relationships I'd built weren't owned by the company. They weren't buried in contracts or buried in org charts. They were built on reliability, on respect, on time, and now those relationships were returning. Slowly, quietly, but unmistakably. I replied carefully. I didn't poach, I didn't pitch. I just said I'd be happy to talk off the record. We set a call for that Friday. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. They asked questions, I answered them, no pressure, just clarity. They left the call saying, "Let's stay in touch." A week later, they gave notice to the company. They didn't come to me right away, it took time, but eventually they did. And when they did, I made sure they knew what to expect. Transparent billing, no fluff, and actual answers. By now, I had an assistant handling scheduling and admin. I'd set up a small office downtown, nothing fancy, just enough to keep things organized. We still weren't advertising, we didn't have to. We had something far more powerful than ads. We had trust. And the company I'd given 30 years to? They were losing it faster than they realized. The CEO hadn't seen the shift because he'd never understood it. He thought progress was about control. But real progress, sustainable progress, is about people, relationships, history. The kind you can't replace with a new hire or a slick presentation. And somewhere in all this, I started to sleep better. I was working harder than I'd planned post-retirement, but it wasn't about the hours. It was the clarity, the sense that I was finally doing the work the right way, without apology. But I wasn't done yet. Not after what came next. I didn't expect the board to reach out. But they did. It was subtle at first. A message forwarded to me by a former colleague who still had ties to the company. One of the non-executive directors had asked, offhand, if I'd be open to a confidential conversation about organizational continuity. Organizational continuity. I almost laughed when I read it. They weren't calling it what it was. They didn't say they were bleeding talent or losing clients. They didn't admit that morale had cratered, or that the CEO's vision had turned out to be just that. A vision, unsupported by execution, loyalty, or results. But I knew what they meant. I didn't reply right away. I let it sit. Not out of spite, but because I wanted to be sure I wasn't making decisions out of emotion. 3 decades with that company had taught me the importance of measured steps. And then, one evening, I got a second message. This time, directly from one of the board members. Someone who'd been around during my earlier years. Someone who knew exactly what I'd contributed, even if they hadn't always said it out loud. He asked if we could talk. No obligations, just a conversation. We scheduled a call. He got right to it. I think we miscalculated. There was a belief that the company needed a disruption. But the way it was done, it created instability, not innovation. I let him speak. They were seeing erosion across the board, not just in operations but in client retention, trust, culture. The CEO had implemented sweeping changes with little understanding of the inner mechanics. And without the people who knew how to make things work quietly, the whole machine had started to seize. "What would it take," he asked, "for you to consult with us, to help steady the ship?" I paused. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I wanted him to hear the silence. "I'm not interested in fixing someone else's mistake," I said. "But I am interested in helping people who still care about doing things right." That was the difference. I wasn't going back. Not to a desk, not to the grind. Not to a place where 30 years could be erased with one bad meeting and a polished smile. But I was open to helping them relearn what they'd forgotten. That businesses run on trust, on memory, on people who show up every day not for glory, but because they take pride in doing it right. So I agreed to advise, strictly as an external consultant. No titles, no rehiring, just structure, clarity, and a roadmap. We started slow, a few key conversations, an internal audit. I reviewed their org chart, their project portfolios, their vendor contracts. I flagged the fractures quietly and provided solutions without headlines. But the real shift came when I requested something simple: face-to-face meetings with frontline employees. Not the managers, not the analysts, the ones doing the actual work. Because I knew the truth. If you want to understand how a company is doing, don't ask the people writing the memos. Ask the people ignoring them just to get the job done. And what I heard in those meetings confirmed everything. Disconnection, burnout, a sense of being replaceable, invisible, untrusted. I summarized it all in a single line during my next call with the board. You can't run a legacy company like a startup without breaking everything that made it valuable. They listened. To their credit, they didn't push back. Not this time. And slowly, they started reversing some of the damage. They didn't fire the CEO, at least not yet. But they quietly sidelined him. Strategic responsibility was moved to a newly formed committee, one that included some of the people who'd been pushed out but were still willing to share their insight. I wasn't interested in politics, so I stayed in the background. My role was quiet, focused, precise. And all the while, my own firm was growing, not fast, but deliberately. I had clients I respected, projects I believed in, and a team that didn't need hand-holding. We weren't trying to be the biggest. We were trying to be the kind of company people missed when they didn't have it. 6 months passed, then 9, then a year, and one day, while reviewing a quarterly report for a long-term client, I received an email that made me pause. It was from the same board member, just a single line. "We've made a leadership change." You were right, no bravado, no apology, just acknowledgement. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window. It was a quiet day, no meetings on the calendar. My phone was silent. For the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to fully feel through all of it. Closure. Not because they finally saw what I had built, not because they recognized what they'd lost, but because I no longer needed them to. I had moved on. Not in bitterness, not in haste, but with clarity. And in the end, I didn't need revenge. I didn't need them to fail. All I needed was space to do what I had always done best: steady work, built on trust, delivered with care. 30 years gave me the skills. Getting fired gave me the freedom. And what came next? It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it was mine. And that, after everything, was enough.